Mr Speaker. Our committee inquiry on school funding and college funding has sought to bring together two seemingly irreconcilable views of the world. The first, that schools are underseeing year-on-year funding reductions and, having largely exhausted non-staff savings through efficiencies, are increasingly moving the bulk of their budget, which is spent on staff, in order to find savings. The second view is that in the midst of the challenging public finances of 2010, difficult decisions were made which saw the core budget, the school's budget, protected over the lifetime of the Parliament. Now, of course, the government have a sense of the public finances, but we also, so do also the schools, the teachers and parents with whom we are in almost constant communication. I visit schools every week in my constituency of Harlow and well aware of the funding pressures these schools face, and William Martin Infant and Junior School have had to restructure their staff and make £360,000 of savings to set a viable 3-year budget. Now, it's a matter of some regret that the debate on education funding has become so polarised, and I hope that we will, through our report, be able to reduce the distance between the different viewpoints. I'm pleased that with the emergence of a strong and independent evidence base provided by the National Audit Office, the Institute for Fiscal Studies and the Education Policy Institute, amongst others, the additional cost pressures faced by schools and the effect of rising pupil numbers are now understood and accepted as fact. And perhaps the 2015 spending review missed a real opportunity in failing to anticipate the pressures the schools would face and not seeing the importance of transitional funding to support the implementation of the national funding formula. Throughout our inquiry, we've been told how the school funding picture is much more complex than a simple question of inputs and outputs. Andrea Schleicher from the OECD explained how increasing educational expenditure did not necessarily lead to greater performance, either in terms of productivity or success in international surveys such as PISA. So pumping huge amounts of money into the school system without a proper plan or programme of reform is unlikely to lead to all good results. And this has been illustrated throughout our inquiry. We need to look at things like the pupil premium, because the accountability mechanisms for it seem to be totally ineffective. Teachers and head teachers have told us again and again that the money ends up being spent on matters wider than targeted support for disadvantaged children. So what is to be done? In the past, governments had something of a strategy for the school system, and we will get an update on that from the schools Minister for School System in accountability hearing next week. But we need a go beyond a more direct relationship between DfE and schools and articulate what is the purpose of education policy and schools at the moment. Is it to top the PISA rankings? Is it to produce a higher proportion of graduates? Is it to prepare the economy for the challenges of the fourth industrial revolution? And most importantly, is it to address social injustice in our education system? Yes, of course.
I thank the honourable member for giving way, and I respect his considerable experience in this field. Simon Kidwell, he's a head teacher from my constituency, has called for a more longer-term funding arrangement for the future. The funding arrangements at the moment are just not sufficient to fund the schools in my constituency and beyond.
Well, I think what I'm just about to say, I think will answer the question of the honourable gentleman, because I actually agree with his point quite strongly. Because I want ministers, in the strongest possible terms, to wholeheartedly embrace our proposal of a 10-year strategic plan for education. Indeed, I was encouraged by the response in committee at the beginning of the month from the Minister. There has to be a shared vision beyond the next election, whatever that might be. The principle of school-based autonomy lay at the heart of policy in 2010. We found some of its limitations, particularly when it comes to governance, financial management and accountability. But autonomy within boundaries is a sound principle from which to start. A 10-year strategic plan ought to be accompanied by a long-term funding plan, as the honourable gentleman has just said, which, if not stretching beyond the spending review period, should set clear expectations about what it would cost to fund schools and colleges to do their jobs. The fact is the NHS now has a long-term 10-year strategic plan and a 5-year funding settlement. And this has come about from serious advocacy from NHS England and the former and current health secretaries, who've strongly made the case both for more funding and funding accompanied by proper reform. It mystifies me that perhaps the most important public service of all, our education and skills for our country, does not seem to receive the same amount of attention or public advocacy for a similar path as we now see for the National Health Service. In the committee, I said that the DFE is sometimes like the cardinals in the Vatican in their negotiation with the Treasury, hoping that a little bit of white funding smoke may appear from the rooftops. But as the NHS argument has shown, this is not the right approach. I hope very much that the DFE will negotiate with the Treasury a 10-year plan and come to this House, just like the Health Secretary did, to set out what that 10-year plan is, and a proper, at least minimally, 5-year funding settlement, again, just as the National Health Service has had, so we can stop having these day-to-day battles on schools and FE colleges' finances, so that the wonderful teachers we have can carry on teaching and children can carry on learning.
Ellie Reeves.
Thank you, Madam